Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Cross. I'm a Columbia Business School student and one of the incoming co-presidents of CEO. We are so happy to have all of you here today, especially for our final conversation. So our final conversation of the day is it's both special and timely. It's special because we have our very own Columbia alum, Walt Mossberg, here, actually. And it's special because we know that everything he says comes exclusively and hot off the press, basically. And our conversation is very timely because we have Drew Houston, CEO and founder of Dropbox, here. And I'm not sure if you've read any tech publication in the past week, but he's been in pretty much every single one of them, having just unveiled a whole new suite of products, including the much buzzed about Carousel app. So Walt Mossberg, to give you some background, is the journalism industry's entrepreneur, having started up the technology section at the Wall Street Journal and then starting up All Things D. He's more recently, this year actually, just started up Recode, the technology publication, and which I'm sure you all know. And in 2007, intros are important. In 2007, Drew was at a bus station in Boston and just opened his laptop and started coding, and 7 years later, is now running the world's leading file-sharing platform, worth $10 billion and completely depended on by 275 million people all over the world, many of whom I'm sure are in this room. So let's all give a nice, warm round of applause for Drew.
Well, thanks, Megan, and thanks, Drew, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So how many people in the room, and you have to be honest, how many people use Dropbox? Oh, you're lying. They're lying. Some of them are lying. No one uses Google Drive? No one uses OneDrive? No one uses Box? All right. But you win.
Nobody's perfect.
So, here we have today an audience that I think is quite interested in. They're obviously interested in your product. I'm very interested in your product. I use all those products, but that's kind of the curse of what I do. I use, pretty much everything. But I actually seriously use all those products, and I would love to sit here and just talk product, and we are going to talk product a little, but I think we should start by talking about more mindset and process and how you got to be a person who built a company like this. You were a student at MIT, is that right? Was it a bus station or a train station? And was it North Station or South Station?
It was South Station. It was the Chinatown bus, the Fenghua, which I think is now defunct, or the Massachusetts Transportation Authority or whatever it is. I think I read some sad article about how the Fenghua is no more, or they got something suspended. They may be back, I don't know, but I loved them very much. Unfortunately, the buses I was on didn't tip over or explode or break down on the side of the highway.
That's good, yeah. And so was it South Station, you were waiting for the bus, or?
Yeah, what happened was I was working on my first company, actually, and I decided to take the bus because I figured, okay, I'd have 4.5 hours each way to get stuff done. And so I rush out the door from my apartment, get a cab to South Station, get on the bus and sit down and open up my laptop and have this feeling that something had gone horribly wrong. And what had gone horribly wrong was I had, all of my company's stuff was on this little thumb drive. And I just remember I forgot to take it out of my computer before going out the door. And so I'm I was okay, well, so I guess I'm not gonna get any work done. And I was well, do I have any Family Guy episodes I haven't seen yet? and I didn't. So then I'm just like, that 4.5 hours, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, and what do you say to yourself in these situations? You don't say like, I hate my thumb drive. You're like, I hate myself. I'm so disorganized. I keep doing this.
And you didn't want to talk to the person next to you at all.
No, I mean, you know, the Chinatown bus, it's like a woman carrying like live crabs in the styrofoam box. You know, so she didn't want to hear about it.
She didn't, no. So this made you think, what if and the bus had Wi-Fi, right?
No, this was pre-Chinatown bus Wi-Fi. So,
Well,
yeah,
so you couldn't use-
you're really just
So
like,
you couldn't use cloud storage anyway.
you're alone with your thoughts for 4 hours. Yeah.
No, but I mean,
Oh no, just everything.
suppose Dropbox had been invented, or suppose you were using some similar product, SugarSync. I think SugarSync was around at that time. I don't know.
They were working on it, but it didn't exist yet.
It didn't exist
There were all kinds of other products that were around then.
But you couldn't have accessed them anyway because there wasn't connectivity on the bus.
Well, that's the thing. Because Dropbox would just keep everything in sync, it doesn't matter. if
'Cause it
you're
would have
online.
been local,
Yeah, 'cause
yeah.
I would have had a copy of everything, and I just wouldn't have had to worry about it. And so I had the idea, and because this wasn't like the first time I had some kind of issue with this, right? And it wasn't just thumb drives. It was like emailing myself stuff and like backing up my computer, and I thought about the computing system we had at school, and you know, you don't think on a Sunday afternoon like, oh, today would be a pretty good day to go back up my Athena workstation, right? Because it's all just taken care of, right? And
Right.
then you graduate, and it's back to like,
And you're the system.
yeah, you are your
you're
own
the
IT
system
administrator.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm like, I shouldn't have to worry about any of this stuff. And so I opened up an editor on the bus and started writing some code that eventually became Dropbox. I mean, I had no idea at the time what this would turn into, but I just wanted to solve this problem really for myself. And then it was clear that that this was something that everybody needs.
It's interesting that this started with a problem you wanted to solve for yourself, because some years ago at one of the conferences I run, we got Bill Gates and Steve Jobs on stage together, and they basically agreed that they didn't say they disliked being wealthy, but they did say they loved building products that they wanted to use. And that was certainly especially true of Jobs, and he never talked about market research or any of that. I'm sure it breaks various rules taught here at the business school, or taught at the business school. But
Yeah, it's impossible. I mean, I thought about that. I'm like, oh, I should really be responsible here and research the market and everything. But there was no market, right? It's like, how do you evaluate a market that doesn't exist yet? But you look at things like people spend a lot of money on thumb drives, and I can talk about some of the first meetings with investors I still have, maybe I should share it sometime, but we have our, my application to Y Combinator is public, so that's like the original kind of, getting into Y Combinator is like college admissions, right? It's like essays. So it's all available online, and it was kind of that was where I first had put forth some of the ideas behind the company, but it was before I had a co-founder. But our pitch to our first venture capital investors, Sequoia, was pretty simple. It's like, look, it's 2007. This is the first slide. It's 2007. Still a pain to keep your stuff safe, to work with other people, to work across multiple computers. Like, when is this going to be better? Like, Tom Cruise in Minority Report is probably not like logging into his Gmail to pick up like the file he sent himself that morning, right? So,
right.
So when is this going to be better?
And he can only do it on Windows, not on his Mac.
Right, yeah, it's all this stuff, right? You have to worry
Can't
about.
do it on his phone. It's just...
Yeah. So it drove me nuts. I'm like, I'm usually pretty even-keeled, but like when technology doesn't work and traffic took an hour to get here, that's when I start to lose it a little bit.
Okay. So did you write code to fix the traffic in Manhattan?
That's next.
On the way
That's
up
the
here?
version 2.
Well, maybe, so you went around to these investors with this deck and some investment advisors or whoever you had, right?
There was an angel investor who introduced us to Sequoia, this guy named Pejman. He was actually he was a Persian rug dealer turned angel investor.
Did he have one of those? Oh, wait a minute. This is
I
serious.
swear to God.
Did he have one of those drugstores on University Avenue?
That's where we were supposed to meet him. Like, so what happened was,
You guys know Palo Alto?
right? Palo Alto.
You know, University Avenue runs down the middle, and I always stay there when I go out to the valley, and I always noticed that there are lots of startups, including ones in stealth, and there are other things on and around University Avenue. But there's like 15 Persian rug dealers there too.
Well, so yeah, it's a bizarre story. Arash and I get in our zip car, driving down from San Francisco, and we're like, okay, we're going to like 251 University or something in Palo Alto, and we get there, and we pull over, like, find a parking spot. We're getting all like jittery because we're running a little bit late.
Right.
And we look up, it's like 251, and we're like, it's like Medallion Rug Gallery, and we're like, oh shit, like, you know, we have the wrong address, or like, what's going on? And we go in there, and we're like, hey, is Pejman here? And the receptionist was like, oh yeah, sure. And they take us through this like secret back entrance, where in the back of this rug shop is like a boardroom and like a projector and all this stuff for like the startups to come demo their things. And before Dropbox, they had leased some of their extra office space to PayPal and taken stock. So he'd actually done this with a couple of other companies. So it's just bizarre. And then they introduced us to Sequoia. But it's funny because earlier people had pretty reasonable objections to the idea. They're like, look, there's 100 of these startups.
Right.
None of them are successful. All the products, and so what I said was like, well, you know, okay, yes, there are 100 people or 100 companies, big and small, all kinds of different products that are supposed to solve this. Do you use any of them? And invariably people would be like, no.
Unlike our poll here.
What's that?
Unlike our poll.
Yeah. So this was back then. I mean, and part of the problem is you have to you need one thing to back up your computer. You need another thing to sync things across, you know, your computers. You need others would be like a website you upload files to, and you have some other service to send big files. And so it's like, why are we like? I was like, this is such a mess. Like, it should all be solved by one thing.
And at that time, did anybody raise this objection with you? Oh, Microsoft and Apple will just do this and put it in the OS. And
yeah, later on they did. And certainly, when we talk to investors, they ask that question just to see what we would say. But that there always is going to be a bigger competitor, and so they just want to make sure you're thinking logically about it.
you don't think that they were raising that question because they really thought it was a serious problem?
Well, the thing was, it wasn't so much that, of course, like Microsoft would make something primarily for Windows, but no one was going to address the cross-platform
Right.
piece, which ended up being true. I mean, there's actually no real reason why someone couldn't have made something that was cross-platform, but it turns out when you're in one of these companies.
But now they have
Yeah.
something that's completely
for sure.
cross-platform.
Yeah.
And even some aspects of iCloud are cross-platform. Not much, but some. Well, photo sharing is cross-platform and a couple of other small things. But
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, but the experience on their own platform, they focus like 95, like certainly Apple, like they'll focus like 95%.
Yeah. No, I
on
agree
iOS.
with you. Microsoft is in a position where that's really important. So like when they released Office for iPad after sitting on it for 3 years, I mean, you know, they had to do that. Okay, so for the benefit of the audience, did you have to do a road show, or did you just go see Sequoia and that was it?
Well, it was funny because Pejman, the guy I talked about, who's an angel investor, came with us to our pitch at Sequoia.
Uh-huh.
And I think, which I thought was like, I didn't really think anything of that, but it's sort of like, and it turned out, I didn't know this at the time. So after our meeting, we leave the room, and he's talking to our partner, being like, look, like, for you, my friend, we'll get a great deal on this company. They got 5 other offers. Like, you got to hurry up here, make a decision. Like, which wasn't entirely untrue, but, you know, and so I get the phone call, like an urgent phone call that night, being like, hey, you know, we really enjoyed meeting you guys this morning, and so Mike is not going to be around at the partners meeting on Monday. Can he come over tomorrow, Saturday morning? And I'm like, Mike. I was like, oh, Mike Moritz. Like,
Yeah.
he's like the godfather of Sequoia. He, you know, was on the boards of Google and Yahoo and all these companies. And so, I mean, there's only one answer to that question. And And I was like, oh, sure. We're up in North Beach. There's a lot of nice coffee shops around. Or sort of jokingly, I was like, oh, or you can come to like Dropbox World HQ. We had just moved into our apartment. We literally, like boxes in the living room, had not unpacked our stuff. I mean, we'd been there for maybe a week or two. And so sure enough, 10 a.m. the next morning.
Well, he was a journalist at one time in his career, so he could get scruffy.
Yeah, no, he liked it. He thought it was great.
Yeah.
But I remember panicking because like we didn't have anything in our fridge. And so I'm like, oh shit, I should get something for him to drink. I'm like, forget food, but at least I can get, so I'm rushing down to this cafe nearby, and I'm like, oh God, what does he want? Does he want water? Does he want like Odwalas? What kind of Odwala does he want? Does he want like iced coffee? So I walk back with this, I run back with this armful of drinks that I put in my fridge, and then he shows up, and I'm like, you want anything to drink? He's like, no, I'm good.
You're not learning this stuff in classes. This is the real world of raising money, you know. So, but it worked.
It worked. But he's got this like piercing, like steely gaze. He doesn't you don't get a lot of feedback. So he just sort of
it's like going to
peers
therapy.
at you. He peers into your soul. Yeah. And then he's like, thanks. Maybe ask a couple questions about competition, but then he left, and but then we had the partners meeting on Monday, and a handshake deal that night, and so it was like one business day turnaround, which happens sometimes, but it was pretty rare.
That's very
back then,
unusual.
Especially for a bigger
And
investment firm.
the fact that they were basically, I assume, partly they didn't want you to go see other people.
No, this was like a buy it now kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Buy it now. Yeah. Don't wait for the auction. Buy it now. How long from then to when you launched?
So it was about a year and a half. It was another year until we launched the product publicly, but we had a closed beta we had a rolling beta starting pretty soon after. We had a prototype working after Y Combinator, and so we first made a couple hundred people, and then probably the next big inflection point was in March of 2008. I made this video that I put on Dig that had all these little Easter eggs in it, and so Dig is basically Reddit. Dig was actually much bigger than Reddit at one point, but you guys know those kinds of sites. And so I made a video, but I put all these little Easter eggs in it for people that were familiar with Dig and Reddit and those kinds of, or just sort of the internet memes. So I would embed, it was just a demo of me walking through the product and sort of narrating the screencast. But the stuff, you'd see all these things behind the scenes. Like there'd be a picture of Tom Cruise jumping on a couch. Like references to Obama was before the election, XKCD comics, like the HD DVD decryption key, like all these like obscure things to like normal people, but to that audience, they're like, what is going on with this video? And so it ended like it got like 12,000 digs. Our beta waiting list went from like 5,000 to 75,000 people overnight. And I learned that was something I learned from a book that I called Guerrilla Marketing. It's like, what do you do when you have no money, but you need to get people to use your stuff? And so that was a pretty classic guerrilla marketing kind of thing.
Everybody writing this down?
Yeah, reading was probably the most important thing I did.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So you read that book? What else did you read?
I read, 100, maybe hundreds of business books over the last, 10 years. But I would do that. I would be in my fraternity house in the summer, and, I had this, green folding chair I would drag up to the roof on weekends, and I just read. Because I didn't know anything about, sales or marketing or finance or strategy or all these other things you need to know. And so it would be as simple as, type sales into Amazon, and what are, the top 3 best-selling books, and you just start reading. And that's not enough. You have to obviously do more than just read, but it can start to give you a frame of reference so that you're paying attention, and then it just moves you up the learning curve a lot faster.
Did it allow you to avoid hiring MBAs or what?
Oh, we have some MBAs now, but no, you really need to understand the fundamentals of business. I mean, this is an obvious statement, but in the beginning, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be CEO, because I was a really good engineer, and I've been programming since I was a really little kid. But I'd never really run a company before. I'd been in startups, but you look at your classic CEO, and I did not look like that person. And so many of the things you need to do as a CEO were very unfamiliar and kind of uncomfortable for someone who is there's something really great about just the orderly world of code where everything just kind of makes sense, and once you start getting people involved, it gets a lot more messy.
How would you compare your journey to the journeys of other people you know about it, that these people might have heard about? I mean, is everyone really different, or is there some similarity to it as these folks go out and try to start companies and things? Are there...
I think the paths are all different, and it's easy to kind of try to obsess and optimize. What is the ideal sequence of things from today to what becoming an entrepreneur. But I think it's probably more in common than not, right? It's just like drive and intellectual curiosity, the ability to kind of take responsibility for your learning. I think those are like pretty important characteristics, and you just have to think about, like, well, what am I going to need to know 6 months, 12 months, 5 years from now? I was really uncomfortable at public speaking or all kinds of other things. And so you just have to start like drilling these things and reading about them and practicing and sort of taking ownership of training yourself for all the stuff you're going to need to be good at.
And to do that, you had to not be coding some of the time,
Yeah,
right?
you had to
make a choice.
So we raised money so we could hire people, and then I had to hand off a lot of my coding responsibilities to other people on the team, which was really scary for me because I'm like, you just can't. It's so tempting, just like grab the keyboard away from the guy and be like, dude, you're doing it wrong. Let me just do this. So that was a learning experience, trying to get a group of engineers to all work together. But that's what you have to do.
So, who is the product for? And was it important for you to decide who it was for before you really got rolling, or even when you were talking to Sequoia with the rug dealer? I mean, who's obviously more than a rug dealer, we should say.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. So it was really hard to describe Dropbox and to have crisp answers to those questions. In theory, it was kind of for everybody, but it wasn't really, because back then, the iPhone didn't exist. Like mobile, as we know it, didn't exist at all. Like people had one computer, it was running Windows. It's just a completely different world. So, but I read in another book called Crossing the Chasm about how technology kind of makes its way through, the world, and what you do, one way that tends to work is you go after the early adopters and innovators, and they have these different segments, but basically you go for people who like look for what you're doing, kind of for its own sake or for fun. They like, for someone who's like, oh, it's a Saturday afternoon, I want to go try 10 storage products. Like those people are out there. There's not a lot of them, but they're hanging out on Dig, and so that was really it was a pretty deliberate decision to go after early adopters and then cross over into more.
Okay, but when you did the crossover, I guess maybe I didn't ask it right. It seems to me that, at least in my experience of looking at a lot of products over the years, and even my own stuff that I've done, you have to sort of have some sort of focus, at least at the beginning. You have to say, is this for IT departments, let's say? Is this for consumers? Is this for student? I mean, who is it for?
It's just consumers generally. Did
you guys ever have an argument about whether it ought to be? For instance,
so
Aaron Levy, I'm
sure.
I know him. He will be very clear that he is all about enterprise.
Yeah.
That's what he's all about.
Right.
If you look at his website, there is a sort of consumer plan, but he doesn't. I don't even know why it's there, but he has it. You might know why it's there, but because if you talk to him,
they started out in consumer actually.
But he no longer has the slightest. Evinces the slightest interest in it. It's all enterprise. In fact, it's a running joke between us because he knows that I read about consumer products. But did you have that debate about whether you should?
So initially, it was certainly aimed at consumers or individuals. Now the thing is, since the beginning, it was also we used Dropbox primarily for work, right? We ran the company off of Dropbox. So, I remember there's a night in September, like a night that turned into early morning, September 2007, maybe October, and Arash and I finished making shared folders. And then the first thing we did was move all of our corporate stuff, all our documents into our shared folder. It was just the two of us. But so it actually has origins in work, and since the beginning, it's always been kind of this straddling both, which ended up being super confusing for us, future investors, things like that, because we couldn't make up our mind. And it was only much later that we realized, like, okay, there are just some things in your life that you use in both the home and work context, right? So you don't like jump in your like enterprise car to go to work, and then your like consumer car to go to the store, right? Or your phone is another example. Windows, Office, Skype. There were some examples of things that had a foot in both worlds.
Certainly,
but it took us a
certainly
while.
that around the time you were doing this is when that blur, which was happening in real life. I mean, companies don't expect you, if you have a professional job now, they don't expect that you kind of turn off on the weekend if there's something to be done. On the other hand, they're unlikely to fire you for Xeroxing your kid's school project at the office because they know you're going to go home and do some work probably that night. It's not like it was 50 years ago or traditionally. And on these devices, despite IT departments trying to enforce very strict bans, and some of them still do, mostly people just mix it up.
Yeah.
There are some people that carry two
Right.
phones and all that, but not most people.
Yeah, and so we thought about it from that kind of first principles way, like why would we make this artificial distinction between consumer and enterprise? But probably the hardest thing of all this, I mean, there's a lot of hard product stuff we had to do to support both, but it was just culturally, internally. The first 20, 30 people in the company were like our friends and friends of friends. That's also studied computer science at MIT, was sort of the epicenter of the kind of person we had in the company, early 20s. And like, we were very scared when we're like, oh, we should go after enterprises. I really wanted to do that because I knew that one of the things that made people happiest was using Dropbox at work. And it was a good market for us and all these other things, but we were always terrified that if we, the kind of person who works at the typical, kind of prototypical enterprise company, is not the kind of person who would, like, they're like more sales and marketing driven. There's very different culture. They wear their phones on the outside of their pants and stuff like that. So,
Thanks for all the stereotypes.
Yeah.
Those are good.
we love the enterprise.
And I don't work at a big enterprise, but I mean, those are interesting stereotypes.
I'm just taking this stereotype, right? And so, but we were like, how the hell do we build a company that can address both of these markets? And we debated viciously, like, should we just ignore it? Should we ever go after it or not? Because we were worried about having these, like, splitting, like, bifurcating the company culture in a way that would cause, like, endless conflict. And so it took a long time for us to get our heads sorted out on that. Because there's just so much, we were like having enough trouble just like building the company and keeping the lights on. And so when I'm pushing to also go after the enterprise, other people in the company were rightly like, are you out of your mind?
Well, this is not a unique problem. This is a problem even Microsoft, which is pretty entrenched in the enterprise, has, because they've always also wanted to be in the consumer space as well, and they have been in both spaces, but there are friction points,
Yeah.
And the whole debate about whether they should open stores, and the whole debate about whether they should do their own tablets. Whatever you think about the success or how they did it, was a debate about, oh my God, I mean, there's like hundreds of people at Microsoft whose job, is to make Dell and HP and Acer happy, and now these other guys over here are going to make something that competes with those guys that I have to deal with every day. I mean, it's, but the other guys were arguing, well, we can't continue this course of doing everything we do through some other company. So,
there's a book called Innovator's Dilemma, which covers all this stuff. I mean, these are really important books for me. Like,
but in a way, when it was finally decided that it would be okay to try to amp up in business, did you have to hire a sales force, or did you just sort of use the model? I once asked Jobs about this on a stage, and he talked about how if you look at the Fortune 500, and now this was some years ago before, I think, the breakdown of the power of the IT department, but he said there's 500 orifices, was his term, that you have to sell to, and we don't that's not the thing we like to do. So he went, to the extent iPads and iPhones and things like that are in corporations, he went just basically through the CEO down, which was a very important part of their strategy.
Which we did too.
You did too. I want to hear about that. And the other end, the completely other end of the scale, which is you, everybody out there. You go and get a job, and if you happen to be not starting your own company or not only starting your own company, but working at, I'm going to make this up, but you're working at DuPont Chemical or something, and you have a choice of a couple of job offers, and the DuPont Chemical person says, we're going to give you this lovely BlackBerry and this 2.5-inch thick Dell laptop running Windows 7, and you have, a Nexus 5 or an iPhone and a Mac or a MacBook Air or a Chromebook or something that you'd rather use, and they say no, we're very rigid about it. You're like, well, I'm moving on to the next place. So between the CEO and the new employees, it became very hard, and that's another way to get in. And you're saying that's
So that's more what happened to us. Is we just had this. So meanwhile, we're having these philosophical debates over whether we should go after the enterprise or businesses or not. But it's already happening. So
Right.
people are already discovering that there's a better way to collaborate at work. And then, especially the last couple of years, it's become so pervasive that, it's on IT's radar. They're like, what do we do with this thing? We can't, it's different. Just the same way an iPhone comes into the office, they're like, I can't control it. Like, what is, like,
I
what do
hate
do
it.
about
I don't.
Should I ban it? Like,
Part of it is really I don't understand it. I can't support
Yeah.
it. If somebody asked me, if the CFO asked me a question about her iPhone, I'm not going to be able to answer it. So the safest thing is to say it's insecure and
Yeah.
we can't have it.
yeah. And so they're not, like, IT is like over the last 10 years been put in this really tough spot where either, like, IT has like two jobs. Like, one is like make the workforce productive through technology.
Right.
And two is keep the company safe and keep all the information
Right.
safe. And so increasingly IT has been forced to either give the people what they want or keep the company safe, when it's really this false distinction, right? Like it's not mutually exclusive. Like, both the end user and IT want stuff that's like simple and secure and easy to use.
Sure.
And so on. So we've made that a much bigger focus over the last 3 years, is building all the things that IT needs for the visibility and control that they have to do their job. But we want to make IT just as happy as we make our users.
But there are still some companies that ban Dropbox, right?
Yeah, like heavily regulated companies. Sometimes they have like statutory requirements of, like, they can't put certain kinds of information in services like Dropbox. But that's not as common as
All right.
I would have thought.
Okay. I have a very specific product question. I have several product questions for you. And I need somebody to give me a sense of the time when we get close to wherever you want to stop so that we have a Q&A. Megan is going to do it. And I'm all right? Good. So I have some product questions.
All right.
So I use Dropbox every day. And as I said, I use the others as well. And obviously, I'm acutely aware that one thing you do not have that Google and Microsoft have is a built-in cloud-based productivity suite. I don't know how many of you know this, but if you go to what was SkyDrive, it is now OneDrive. I don't know why they changed the name.
This is a lawsuit.
Oh.
They got sued by
That's a
company
good
in
reason to
in
change the name.
England,
But
yeah.
anyway, you click on a PowerPoint thing in there, even if you don't have Office installed on your computer, or let's say it's an iPad and it was before they put Office on the iPad, or you don't have it on there, it'll bring up a version of PowerPoint that isn't complete. It's stripped down. I've used that term when I've written about it, but it's actually reasonably functional. It lives on the cloud. Google, we all know, Google Drive actually started as Google Apps, and I can tell you 10 criticisms I have of it. I tell them, I was in Mountain View talking to them and told them all 10 a couple weeks ago, but the point is, it's there and you can do stuff, and I know that in my work, we have certain teams in our little company that are on there editing stuff simultaneously, and it's an advantage. It stores, it syncs, it's on all my devices, and it has a productivity suite in there. You do not. You announced something that I think aims to fix that. Can you explain this to me? And
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's interesting, we sort of start with like, well, what are people doing at work? And like, when you think about all the different tools and things we use, it's not like someone carefully designed all these tools and made them work together. It's just sort of this like haphazard evolution where you have stuff from, you have like email, which grew up in the 70s or 80s, coexisting with Office, which grew up in the 90s, and you have newer stuff, like all the things you mentioned. And then you have your calendar and your to-do list and your notes and all this other stuff that you use for work. And all of us kind of have to duct tape this stuff together, right? It's all kind of a mess. Even one of the things we announced on Wednesday at our big launch was, there's a billion people out there using Office. One of the great things about Office is there's nothing quite like it. There is no other PowerPoint or Excel. Now, there's other tools that are better for simpler use cases, and I think that stuff is more, you're going to see a lot more of that. But one thing that's frustrating is, if you're working on a document in Dropbox, you can have two people sitting 10 feet away from each other, all putting the finishing touches on it, only to find out there's a collision, right, or that there's a conflict now. Conflicted
because
copies.
you didn't have a tool
because you
right
can't,
there.
no one can tell that like someone
But
else
that
has
wouldn't
the
be
file
true
open.
in Google Docs.
That's right. It wouldn't be true in Google Docs. But sometimes you really need to use, like a finance team or a lot of people still need to use
No, I
Excel.
understand.
So
I don't think the spreadsheet in Google Docs is nearly as good as Excel.
so
I don't think the WordPress.
And this isn't intended to be like a one-to-one Google Docs equivalent. It's really just.
So what is it? Explain what you did.
So basically, we made this thing that we call Project Harmony. And you guys know how we have little green checks on every file, right, in your Dropbox, and you know that you're good and you're up to date. Basically, this takes that little green icon and puts it inside of Office, inside the document, inside the app. So that PowerPoint can tell you like who else has this document open. And you can actually chat within the document to be like, hey, what do you think of this change? If I hit save, you get notified that, hey, Drew's made a change, refresh your version. It kind of makes it collaborative.
So it's a plugin?
So it's a plugin for Office. And it works on Mac, Windows. We haven't shipped it yet, but that's something coming later this year. But it completely changes how you work in Office.
And it's not going to run into conflicts with their ridiculously complicated track changes thing they have?
It's sort of outside.
I have no opinions, by the way. I'm just straight down the middle, in case there are any journalism
It's
students.
just like this really lightweight way of just seeing who else is present or who else is using the document, just so you don't have these like really bad kind of mid-air collisions. And it's really cool. And it's not just for Office. We're opening it up as an API, and we'll hopefully this will be something that any desktop software can support. And then so in short, we're tackling this problem from like 10 different angles. So one is just making Dropbox better. Another is making Office and sort of the things that are bringing a little bit of the collaborative benefits, like the things you have with Google Docs, into Office, even though Microsoft's also doing it.
So how does Mailbox fit in with Dropbox?
Well, what we're really trying to build is this home for all your stuff, this home for your life, where these things all used to be physical, right? They used to be like piling up on the table in your entryway, right? Your mail, used to be your work stuff would be in your briefcase, your photos would be in your living room. Now these things are all on servers, and so we need a new home for this stuff. And we started out with files through this magic folder, but now we're taking on other kinds of data, right, or of your stuff. So we added mail last year with Mailbox. We've done a lot of stuff with our platform for developers, so they can store other kinds of information. So that a game developer can put the levels you've unlocked or your high scores in Dropbox using this kind of new database in a way that if you're playing on an Android phone and switch to an iPad, that it picks up right where you left off. But anyway, what we're doing now is we're going just from like holding on to your stuff in Dropbox to and holding on and just storing some of it, storing just the files, to like really covering all the bases of storing all the stuff you care about in one place. And instead of just being a container, like making something like Carousel, making your photos more useful instead of just being kind of stuck in a folder somewhere.
And Carousel will roll out when?
Carousel's out. Go get it. We're really proud of it. But here's another problem, right? Now my photos,
So Carousel's an app
Carousel, yeah.
that the back and just it takes the back end of the photos I've put in Dropbox.
Right.
Which I put all my photos in Dropbox.
Right.
Which I have something to bitch to you about
Okay.
in a second. I put them all in Dropbox. But
I'm
now
ready.
if I get Carousel, that's a new way to organize
Yeah.
and view them.
Have you
Sure.
played with it yet?
Not yet, but
Okay,
I will.
I'll show it to you. I love it. I mean, basically, I had this problem where I'm like, God, I've got thousands of photos in 100 different places, right? Because, the photos you have on your phone, you only can see the photos you took with that phone. It's like life started when you walked out of the Verizon store. It's crazy, right? I did take photos. I took pictures before 2007. They're on my computer. They're on external hard drives. It's this mess. And I'm like, well, what we want is something that's as easy and familiar as a native photo gallery, but can store everything.
So it's a little bit, forgive the
Yeah.
analogy, but it's a little bit like iTunes Match or for music or Amazon's cloud system for music, where they said, okay, you have to pay us a little bit. I think it was $25 a year, but we are not going to ask any questions about where it came from. Whatever.
I mean,
you could have ripped it off CDs.
We
you
don't
could have
ask
stolen
questions
it.
about where your photos came from.
No, that's very good of you. That's fabulous of you. Although there are, you could have copyrighted photos, I suppose. But.
Yeah, but it's really about people's the photos that they take.
All right, so I have not tried Carousel, but I did. You're constantly annoyingly asking me to upload all my photos. And not only you, but your competitors. Every one of you guys does that because I could be wrong, but it seems to me that if I use up my storage, I have to buy some more, right?
We're trying to help. We're just trying to help.
Just trying to help. All right, so finally I said, you know what? I'm going to put all, because our reporter, Liz Gaines, had written the story and mentioned Carousel, and I thought, okay, I don't have that many I have a few photos in Dropbox, but I don't have that many, so I'll just put them all up there. And it said, and I was on a MacBook Air, and it said, we'll put everything from iPhoto up there. Yeah. Great. So I do it. I happen to have a pretty fast connection in my house. It took not that long. It took like a little over an hour for, I don't know, 20,000 photos or something. It wasn't bad. And then I got a huge shock. And here's why. The photos were already in iPhoto, which, as you know, has a mysterious, crazy, nested folder system that no consumer understands. And there's a reason for that. They want you to go through the app interface, and you can export the photos and edit them and do all kinds of things with them, and you don't really need to know the folder structure, but it's there. They're there. They're taking up space on the hard drive or the SSD of the computer. Yeah. What you went and did was made a subfolder in my Dropbox folder called Photos from iPhoto. You didn't delete them from where they were in iPhoto, thank you, but you duplicated them all. So I looked at my available space on my damn computer, and it's like 30 gigs less all of a sudden, and I thought I was just putting these in the cloud. So what is your answer for that? Where's my damn 30 gigs?
Look, so I hear you. I mean,
It'd be hard not to.
yeah.
We're sitting pretty close.
So we don't want to delete any. So never delete stuff is sort of like, first do no harm, right? So I agree. Duplicating the stuff is annoying, but it's kind of the least bad of the alternatives. Now, look,
No, there's
would make
another
more sense.
alternative, which is
Just
you
a
could have
one-way
given me a
upload.
toggle that said,
Yeah.
do you want, one of your competitors does this
Yeah.
for all files, actually, and let you pick specific file types or folders and say, don't do the syncing thing.
Yeah.
Just keep it in the cloud.
So
You
we'll
could have
do
done that.
something more like that in the future.
But if I delete these to get back my storage on my computer, they'll go away in the
Well,
cloud.
just
too.
delete them from my photo. There you go. So, but that's one of the.
Have you deleted all yours from my photo?
Yeah, totally. Well, that's the thing, because we're all going to end up with these photo collections that can't fit on our MacBook Air, right? And that was the problem I had. Is I can't fit all my photos on 10 iPhones, let alone one.
Right.
So that's the great thing about Carousel is you can have you can use as much space as you want. I mean, we have people with tens of thousands of photos using it, and doesn't matter what the folder structure is. It just kind of automatically organizes everything. And removes, well, there's a couple of issues, but by and large, it removes duplicates and all these other things.
But I just want to make it clear that you've now publicly committed to putting a toggle or some kind on there, so I don't have to have 2 copies of every photo.
So we still have a lot to do on the importing front. Like, how do we get not just iPhoto, but you have photos in 100 different places, external hard drives, all this stuff.
I think that was the language, though. I think your language did say we'll take everything from iPhoto.
We do, yeah. But that's just one of. We'll also take stuff from an SD card you plug in, or when you plug in your phone, it'll import the photos.
Or on Windows, the
so all
pictures
that.
folder. Yeah.
So we're just trying to make it much easier to get all that stuff. I know it duplicates things. That sucks. Like there's stuff like that which we'll make better. But we think this is a pretty big step, because not only is it like this sort of infinite space photo gallery, or just this window into your Dropbox, but then we have this awesome sharing stuff where, because Carousel's backing up all your photos, they're already stored in Dropbox, and what you can do is you can share super easily.
Didn't your Dropbox app on these phones also automatically back it up?
So that's moving into Carousel.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because we just want to solve this problem in a more focused way. And what you can do is you can take, a lot of time you'll go on a trip with 5 other people. You'll take 100 photos, so will everyone else. What you can do is you can share that whole event in like a couple of taps. It's like if you were able to text 1,000 photos and videos at once, that's what Carousel lets you do. It takes like a second. And then what happens is you have these conversations, so you send them to the other 4 people or whatever, and then all of them share the photos back. So when you go to the wedding, there's this classic problem where everybody kind of sends these panicked emails.
It sounds like something called the shared photo stream that Apple already has.
And what about Android? Right? What about Windows?
I think there's got to be something in Google Plus. No.
So.
I mean, admittedly, it's a little hard to figure out, but
well, there you go. So, that's.
But shared photo streams work really well. Have you ever used them?
Yeah, but it's like
you can do
like
5,000 photos.
It's like photo sharing for people with red hair, right? It only supports like iOS.
Yeah.
So you have to worry about like, oh God.
No, it supports OS.
Is my mom?
No, it supports OS 10 as well.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. But now I got to worry. Like, my mom has an Android phone and an iPad. I got like, God, I hope my mom opens this on the iPad. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about this stuff.
Right. I agree with you.
And so we've made it a lot easier.
Let's talk about price. Because everybody's interested in how you got where you were, and I know we didn't probably get into every detail, but we got a good outline story, colorful, and you're very successful. But there's a price war in your business right now, and you're not sort of participating in it. You seem to be a non-combatant. Why? I mean, Google is like at a quarter of your price right now.
Well, I mean, it's really...
According to Recode.
Right. So I think what we've really tried to get people to understand is it's not just about storage. And it's not, if it were just about, okay, who's got the cheapest gigabytes, and some people will just want the cheapest gigabytes, and that's fine. Like, we understand.
I want the cheapest terabytes.
You want the cheapest terabyte. Well, and we'll get there, but like, really what we're selling is like this better experience. Same way that if the price of aluminum drops, you're not like, the iPhone doesn't, isn't like wildly cheaper. So we've always like, how do we make Dropbox more useful? We care about cost too, right? And it says cost drop, we'll increase the amount of space and things like that. But it's really about this experience and staying ahead on the experience. And so, because like the people that buy Dropbox in general, they're not like, some people are like, all right, how many gigabytes am I getting how many pennies per gigabyte per month or whatever? But most people are the kind of people that we think Dropbox really helps is like, now I can have my whole life in one place, and yeah, it's $10 a month.
Can't do that with Google Drive. You can't do that with OneDrive. You can. They all have a folder. I can put everything in that folder.
So for the folder part, yeah, I think
it'll sync it.
Yes, but for the folder part, yes.
If I have photos, they have it may not be as good as Carousel. I don't know. I haven't done the comparison, but there is a way to show photos in an appropriate way that isn't the same as showing documents. Amazon has a thing just for music. They have another one for photos. I mean, you're not the only one who's thought
sure,
about
sure.
treating different file types differently.
But like, I don't think a lot of people use those things because they don't solve the problem in like a fundamental way. I mean, we'll see. I mean, time will tell.
But you're not going to get involved in this price competition, or for a second
look,
there it sounded like you might. I don't know.
We always want to have like as our cost structure improves, we want to pass some of that along or give you more space. But we're always, you know, when we think about the business, there's some fundamentals that have to line up, right? So every paid user has to support some number of free users. And we really want this to be not just about, I mean, the same, iCloud actually does a good job of this, right? You don't think of how many gigabytes does iCloud give me.
It's all invisible.
Right, so that's same thing that more and more gigabytes and all this stuff is going to take a back seat.
Although there is a
Dropbox
limit,
works.
and they will tell you when you're running up.
Right, yes, they'll tell you every
some
goddamn day,
Yeah.
that you don't have enough space. But yeah.
Hi, Nick Crossway, also MBA. Where do you think you personally and also Dropbox would be today if you hadn't been through Y Combinator?
Well, there are no controlled experiments in startups, so it's totally unknowable. But certainly Y Combinator was a great foot in the door, and you know, they were one of the links in the chain that let us get to Sequoia, and then Sequoia ended up being like super helpful because that's their business. They take the, you know, scruffy 23-year-old engineers and help shepherd them along the process to building a big company. So you know, I have no idea, but I think it would have been a lot harder to get plugged in for a couple of, you know, kids from just at MIT to get plugged into that ecosystem.
Thank you.
Lane Chen, Columbia Business School. So Drew, so you indicate you're not going to participate in the price war, and then there's more competitors into this space. I wonder. I also, you know, read some sources say only 1% or 4% are paid customers of Dropbox. So I wonder, are you going to pursue any other revenue opportunities? That's one question. Second is, when you first approached VCs, Sequoia, did they make any comments on your business model? Thank you.
Investors didn't focus that much on the business model in the beginning. And we were lucky kind of that the first dart we threw worked, where we're just like, all right, it wasn't that scientific how we chose the business model. We're like, our competitor, we're not going to be like twice as expensive as our competitors. We're not going to be half as expensive. So, and like Mobile Me at the time was like $99, and so were a lot of other folks. And so we're like, we'll just do that and see what happens. That was our scientific pricing analysis. And then we did all these split tests and analytics and different things, and then it turned out that the point, after testing all these different combinations, it turned out the profit maximizing point was where we started, which was a relief, but it felt like a lot of effort to discover that. So as far as evolving our business model, I mean, we have. So like things like Dropbox for Business are a paid-only product. So if any, you know, and that has all these features designed for IT and for companies. And I'm sure we'll continue to add other things in the future. But we wanted to mainly we wanted to just keep it simple.
I was just wondering, I have a product question. I was wondering why it is that no one can create a word processor or Excel program that is nearly as good as Microsoft. Why can't Google come in and replicate that on the cloud? Why can't Dropbox do that? Yeah.
Well, so you know, it's a pretty different question of can you build like a word processor in the cloud or a mobile-first word processor versus can you build, or spreadsheet versus like can you duplicate Excel? Like Excel and the other Microsoft formats have like 30 years of IP invested in them, right? So it ends up being, like a lot of people have tried to sort of like whip up a Office suite in the browser, and it always ends up being a little bit janky. But where are the big gaps? Like what are the problems that we can go after? Like what are the handful of problems that we can go after where there's like a big delta between what's out there and what we think we can do? So Carousel is an example of that. We thought we could do something that's like 10 times better than anything else out there. That's how we started with Dropbox. We're like, this will be 10 times better than anything else that's out there. You know, if we went for music, we'd be like, we might be able to do something that's like 20% better or twice as good, but it's like you pick the ones that are really the bigger problems first. And so, so you know, that's where our focus
Can I
is.
just make a comment if you're interested? I mean, obviously there are people who don't need all of the features in Microsoft Office, and there are people in this room and elsewhere who find it's perfectly fine to use Google Docs, or even, I mean, I see documents in Pages, which I didn't used to see. But I think he's right. I mean, they have huge teams over the years that have put all these features in. People get addicted to them, and there's also a corpus of documents that goes back decades. Office, the GUI, the graphical user interface versions of Microsoft Office were introduced with the Mac in 1984, and there were DOS versions before that, and then they were introduced again on Windows when it started. In 1984 and 5 is where that started. And so you have like an infinite number of documents in the world that are in that format. And the format, you know, other people can read the format and can edit the format, but not with that kind of fidelity.
Yeah, and I think that it's true that the average person only uses 20% of the functionality or 20% of the features. We all just use a different 20%.
Right.
Right, so you need a pretty big area of coverage for solving a problem that the word processor or spreadsheet or presentation software solve. Now, I think there are much lighter weight ways of accomplishing the underlying goal, which is really get people on the same page. You know, if you're drafting a blog post as a team, you don't really need, like, you know, to be able to have a nested table with like right to left text and, you know, superscript, right? So there is an 80-20 there, but Office is going to be here for a long, long time.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jen Lam, Columbia Business School. Dropbox operates on a freemium model, and you guys are doing a ton of stuff with Carousel and Project Harmony. How do you decide what to give away for free and what to charge for so that you can build a better proposition for pro and for business?
I think it's both. So the question is, how do we decide what's free, what's paid? It's kind of an art and a science. We always want people to have a good experience with a free product. We'd rather have a much bigger audience and then one that's more narrow, but maybe more profitable. And so we just think like, okay, well, what do our users perceive as valuable? And how do we, for stuff that's like really, really valuable, for stuff that people pay $100 a month for, you know, we tend to segment that stuff. For stuff that's like narrower or more niche, that we'll segment that stuff into the business product or the pro product. And that's the kind of thing where as you're putting your whole life in Dropbox, then, you know, it'll make more and more sense to have some kind of paid version. We want it to be cheap. We want it so that most people can use the cheapest entry-level plan for everything. And we're not just trying to, like, you know,
But would you ever get rid of the totally free one?
No, we'd never get rid of the totally free one, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you mentioned that you weren't sure if you wanted to be CEO in the beginning. So I was wondering, what were some of the most challenging decisions you've had to make, and how has your mindset changed as a result of your position?
So probably the most challenging decisions you have to make are really around people, right? Because, you know, as the company's growing, you got to hire the right people, and when you don't, it creates a lot of problems. And then you have these tough situations where people might have been really good at one phase of the company, but they're not. The company's needs are always changing and growing exponentially, and sometimes the company's growth or the needs of the company outpace someone's ability to kind of catch up. And so you have to end up moving those people out of the way and hiring other people, which makes a lot of people feel bad. Those are really painful conversations. So that's like usually the hardest part. And then there are days where just like things go really, really wrong, right? And it's very personal. It's very frustrating. You know, it's this roller coaster where sometimes it's very personal. It's like this giant spotlight on all of your weaknesses. It feels like, and so I think the only thing you can do is really, again, just like train yourself to get better at all these things all at once. And unfortunately, you know, I always thought it'd be really scary to run even a 100-person company because I knew I'd never managed anyone before Dropbox. Really, maybe a couple things. Probably the closest experience was like being rush chair in my fraternity, which is actually really good training for managing people. I'm serious. Like when you don't sign their paychecks, like it's a lot harder to get people to, you know, to do what you need them to do. But I thought it'd be really scary to run a 100-person company. But all this happens like one day at a time, right? And you can surround yourself. And moving to San Francisco for me was a big deal because all the people who had built these companies were still there. There's a really great culture around helping each other. I've benefited a lot from learning from other CEOs, and you know, you talked about all these other entrepreneurs, and as Dropbox has gotten further along, you get to become friends with those people. You get to understand the challenges that they confronted, and usually they're pretty similar in what they did to solve them. And so it's really the hardest, or the best thing I did to deal with kind of how hard it is to build a company is really surround myself with, like, move to San Francisco, surround myself with people and investors who had seen this kind of thing before. And, you know, and unfortunately all of it happens one day at a time. It's not like you wake up one day and things are way harder or more complicated. And it doesn't get more stressful, it just gets different.
Thank you. And thank you, Drew.